Well, welcome everyone. Today's topic on our webinar from Help Systems is IBM Business Continuity 101 and how to identify and prevent business disruption in all of its different forms. We got a great cast of presenters today with me today. This is a 30-minute webinar, so it's going to be rather quick. There will be handouts available to you at the end. We'll send you an email along with a chance to listen to the recording again in the future if you'd like. One of my colleagues, Mr. Chuck Lazinski, is going to do a couple polls for us along the way. Without further ado, let's get ourselves started here and roll into our first guest speaker from UK, none other than Mr. Ash Giddens. How are you today, Ash?
I'm good, thank you, Tom. Good morning to you. So I guess just a little bit about me. As you can tell from my accent, I'm not based in the States. I'm in the UK, an hour north of London, and I've been working in and around the I and mid-range systems for about 30 years, just over 30 years now. And I sit on the Common Europe Advisory Council, where we get to meet and to discuss the future of this wonderful platform every month with IBM.
Yeah, what an important committee that you belong to and helping to steer the direction of what's happening on the platform. Thanks for doing that, Ash, and thanks for being part of the Help Systems team. Over to Chuck Lazinski.
Hey, good morning, everyone. I've been with Help Systems for about 20 years now, about 30 years on mid-range like Ash, and I'm also the vice president of our local user group here in the Minneapolis area called QUser. Check us out on QUser.org.
Awesome. And you guys today in QUser take remote users. So if you're somewhere, let's say Montana or somewhere up in Scotland, and you don't have access to a local user group, you can join Chuck and QUser remotely, right, Chuck?
Yeah, absolutely. We use GoToMeeting, and we transmit our monthly meetings and also record those. So if you're a member and you can't make the meeting, we can send you the link to the recording.
Awesome. Awesome. And then finally, I'm Tom Huntington, Executive Vice President of Technical Solutions at Help Systems. Been here quite a while. I'm also the author of the IBM Marketplace Study, which we have now put out for 6 years, which has been a lot of fun to do. And then also, I know many of us now have not only IBM, but you might have AIX, you might have Linux on Power. We also do an AIX survey. And April 2nd, we'll be doing that webinar. And let's see, I'm also an IBM Power Champion. I've been an IBM Power Champion now for over 5 years and very excited to be part of that. It gives us great access to all the key people at IBM in many different areas. So with that said, let's roll into our agenda today. We're going to talk about what the cost of downtime is to your organization, which factors impact business continuity, and what are your business continuity options that you have. So as we get into our first topic, what is the cost of downtime, and talking about building return on investment and thinking about the cost. Before we do that, though, we want to hit our first polling question. And Chuck, over to you to open up our first polling question.
All right, so this is a question that we've been asking in a number of our webinars. We're interested, where do you guys get your information from regarding IBMI? So what we're asking here is, what IBMI industry publications do you read? Do you read IBM Systems Magazine, IT Jungle, one of my favorites, MC Press, PowerWire, maybe you get their email blast, or others? So feel free to send us that information. Looks like we've got the majority picking IBM Systems Magazine. Of course, you might be doing multiple, of course.
The other thing too, Chuck, is we encourage you to use the chat or the question feature within GoToWebinar and share with us if there's something else that you're using today, because this is really a big kind of pondering question. Where do you go to find out about what's happening in the marketplace besides webinars? Not everybody gets to go to Common, or not everybody gets to go to IBM TechU, for example.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and also share some of the additional comments that we received. Mid-range mailing list, Christopher mentioned that, and something called volubus.fr, so a French website, volubus.fr. So it looks like IBM Systems Magazine came out on top. The electronic version, no doubt, most people read that, and IT Jungle come out on top.
Awesome. Thank you, Chuck. Let's move on to our next topic here. And, again, we do the IBM Marketplace study, and this year we had over 500 people take the study, and we always ask the question, what are your top concerns as you plan your IT environment? Of course, number one being security, but then number two is high availability disaster recovery. And, this is not new technology to the IBM Power customer. It's been around for many years, but yet it's something that it appears to me that's very important, everybody, and we all should be evaluating what we're using, what we're doing, probably on an annual basis. And I think that this will continue to be a high ticket item. So then another question that we had is, when it comes to recovery, what kind of systems do you have in place for recovering from a disaster? And this year we had a fairly higher number than typical. We had 58% of you that say you're already using high availability of some sort to do your recovery. Still a lot doing recovery from tape, virtual tape libraries, recovering from the cloud, and some are just doing none, which means a little scary. They might not have anything in place for recovery. So yeah, pretty scary. So over to you, Ash. Talk a little bit about the I guess it's the ITIC Global Server Hardware Reliability Study.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. This is a great table. It summarizes in terms of seconds, minutes, hours, and days what high availability equates to. So I think we start right at the top there, 90%. We call that 1.9, right the way down to 7 nines. So for a system, application, or even a service to be described as highly available, it needs to hit 5 nines. So that tends to be the standard, which, as you can see, is just over 5 minutes downtime a year, which is not a lot. And remember, for external facing disruptions, let's say internet facing, customer facing, if a customer is unable to place an order, be it with a delay or a failure as you go to add it to your basket or hit checkout, there's an industry figure that says there's a 40% chance of that customer retrying the request. Should that request, the second request, fail, you've got a 12% chance of that customer trying the request for the third time, or to put it another way, an 88% chance that you'll potentially lose that customer, not only for that transaction, but for future transactions, probably to a competitor as well. So high availability is key, really, in all walks of life. Okay, Tom. So how much does downtime cost? Here's a 29 survey from Information Technology Intelligence Consulting. The figures on the left of the screen are the costs for businesses surveyed per hour of downtime. And we can see from this that 88% of businesses were quoted in saying that an outage could cost them anything over $300,000 per hour, with 17% at the top end saying a staggering 5 million an hour downtime could potentially cost them. So scary figures here. Thank you, Tom.
Yes.
All right. Well, thanks, Ash. And certainly, what are the causes of downtime? We've talked about now the costs of downtime. What are the causes? And really, the three of us have dedicated our careers to mitigating system downtime. And the first one on this list is really a biggie, and it's one of my favorite topics, is minimizing or eliminating human error. In IT, it's easy to have a small mistake snowball if you don't detect it early, and those small mistakes, thanks to the computer business that we're in, can propagate themselves rather quickly. And so I think human error spans many issues, and really part of the many causes on this list, like software bugs. Maybe somebody was in a rush to get a program into production, and so there just wasn't enough testing done. That was a decision that a human made. Complexity and configuration. We see this a lot. People have put together very complex systems, either hardware or software, and now somebody comes in along maybe 5 years later and needs to tweak something. It's easy to make a mistake. Somebody made a decision to keep old and inadequate hardware in place or unsupported software. Of course, we see that in our business, and so that can definitely cause or be a source of downtime. Understaffed IT, boy, do we hear about this all the time. and it really screams for the need to put some automation in place to backfill some of those slim resources. IT training. Oh, Tom, yeah?
Nope, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say IT training. This is an area that I used to be in full-time for help systems, and so it's a passionate area of mine. So really, the bottom line of all this is that it's business decisions that play a pivotal role in either making the mitigation of downtime easy or making it worse. So the decisions include not funding system upgrades, failure to provide that training, and possibly not putting in policies and procedures to do regular DR testing or HA role swaps, and certainly not having a more comprehensive disaster recovery in place for more than just your IBMI server, but also the rest of the infrastructure. We hear this from some of our clients as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Chuck. So we've been talking about the cost of downtime and those kinds of things, but as a IT professional, it's like, okay, that's great, Tom and Ash and Chuck, but how do I help justify HA from a financial perspective? And one of the things from our good friend Matt Stadler at IT Solutions Group out of Florida, they do a lot with HA technology and hosting customers in this arena. He talks about the business continuity insurance, BCI, and business interruption insurance that many businesses have, as if you can prove out HA, that often the cost of this insurance policy alone can help justify the purchase and getting involved in HA technology, whether it's buying another server, buying software, hardware to help out with this. So something that we all should consider is talking to our business units about business continuity insurance, and are there any ways to save money because we now have an HA solution in place? And HA on IBMI is certainly a very real thing, and customers are very successful in using this technology and doing role swaps. It's not anything new. We've been doing it for 3 decades and more even, really. Now, when we look at HA and do some considerations around it, we have to think about RPO and RTO, and so just, these help kind of define when you talk to your management team about what's going to happen. So recovery point objective means if I have a failure, how many transactions or what am I going to lose in seconds or minutes or hours or days if I have to go back to my recovery? Now, we always talk about ransomware. Ransomware on IBMI, we've heard stories where people have lost full months worth of data because they did not have a good RPO because they weren't doing backups even enough. And the only way you can recover from ransomware is to do a full system restore. And then RTO is recovery time objective. How quick can I get the business back online? What's important to you? 15 minutes? An hour? Or are you okay with 24 hours? And that's one of those funny conversations with customers because, I talk to people about the fact that a few years ago, somebody created this thing called the internet. And because of that, everybody expects everything to be available all the time now, right? Whereas dial back a couple decades ago, and you could get by with a 9 to 5 or 8 to 5 kind of system or environment. And nowadays, you can't. People expect to be able to connect to your IBMI system and access the data on it whenever. Now, as we're building out business ROI and why we should have HA in our environments, we have to think about cost of downtime. So end user productivity, we haven't really talked a lot about that, but how many users are using IBMI and how many, what's their average salary per minute? And if you lost them for an hour and they couldn't work, what's the cost of that? And so 9999, right? Number of FTEs are number of full-time employees. Ash talked about the impact of customers. What's your average cost per sale? Number of sales per minute you make, help you develop a cost of being down for an hour. IT development, how many developers do we have? What's their average salary? What's the cost of losing them? That costs you money. They can't deliver new features to the organization that help you do more business. We have organizations that we deal with that have SLAs, meaning they have to deliver parts. Like take the auto industry, for example. They do a lot of just in time there. And so what's the average penalty if I can't deliver products on time? course, customer loyalty comes into play, and you might have other areas within your organization that you need to say, let's break it down. What's an hour going to cost us? What does that mean to us? Now, another thing I encourage you to do as you're looking to justify and build out a return on investment in this area is tracking your outages. We don't do that very well. So Jim accidentally pulled the electronic plug from frame 1. What did that cost you? It's happened, right? You have somebody in for service and they pull the wrong plug in the data center. Unhook the UPS, causes problem. Somebody wrote a bad program. You know, John did that. Frame 2 had a failed disk unit that caused immediate backup issue. Backup errors kept your server in restricted state. Some reason somebody didn't recognize that you were still in restricted state, and consequently you had to IPL Monday morning. What did that hour cost you? Somebody ran something out of order. What did that cost the organization? Can you roll back from that? New administrator Tim was learning IBMI and he was practicing how to do IPL, but nobody told him that he was actually on a production system and he did an IPL. It cost you an hour of outage. A flood in the data center. Obviously, you can have natural disasters, all kinds of things, but we have to document that so that we can help provide facts about what's happened in the organization. You know, fortunately, I mean, I will say IBMI's got this great reputation of always running, but there are problems that come up and that do impact us. So over to you, Chuck, to talk about which factors impact business continuity.
All right, Tom. You know, the top ITIC issues that I outlined previously line up with how we help you build a better IT. Automation to help minimize human errors, security tools that leverage the securability of the IBMI platform, backup automation and tracking to ensure that your systems are restorable. That's the whole idea behind doing your backups. High availability and monitoring tools to help you be proactive and to add a layer of protection so that, you know, when things go bad, they might go bad inside or externally. All right, so let's talk a little bit about both those. Let's talk first of all about human errors. There we go, human errors. So what are some of the human factors? Well, first of all, right at the top of the page, let's face it, all programming has bugs. You can only minimize the impact by being proactive with your detection and repair of those issues. So monitoring is really critical there. Number 2, oops, I executed a command in production rather than test. I know that Ash is really good with color coding his terminal sessions, but silly things like that do happen. So having proper permissions in place for executing code out in your production environment is important, and rules that you can put in place to protect those environments. Operator checklists for running batch processing is really an archaic way to do business. We still have folks out there doing that. You know, very easy to enter an incorrect date or maybe accidentally run a batch twice or out of order, or perhaps someone's filling in for the regular operator. Maybe the manager's filling in and he only runs the batch processing twice a year, and that really screams for automation. Every week we have people contacting us looking for message monitoring because they don't have anything and they do it occasionally, and sometimes inquiry messages linger out there for a long period of time, interrupting or delaying batch processing, and sometimes they can go undetected until the next day, and that's really easy to fix. And finally, canceled backup jobs. Backups can be canceled or interrupted for many reasons, or at least not be successful, and so we want to make sure you get a good backup. And then, of course, there's the obvious natural disasters. Everything listed on here should be considered a major disaster and would really require a co-location some distance from your home base. We've spoken with many companies who've maintained their HA systems in a separate building on the same campus, or maybe just a couple miles down the road. Not such a good plan if you've got some major disaster on the way. So distance can be challenging because of the latency, but the communications technology has gotten so good that things like asynchronous replication with IBM Global Mirror is certainly an option.
Yeah. And this is one of those too where people need to think about power grids too as you're planning your locations. Sometimes you'll be surprised how far out and expansion the power grid is, you want to be on different power grids if you can.
Right. Yeah. Good point.
Awesome. So cybersecurity is certainly a factor to consider too. Again, programmers can cause some problems that cause problems with the authority around access. Problematic commands that aren't being policed that maybe should be locked down, especially on production servers. Star public access to root directory. We've seen that. We do the free security scans through our PowerTech offering where we take a look at these things for you and we can kind of quickly tell you where there's a risk, and that's something you can fix really quick. If you have this situation, you are a potential victim of ransomware on IBMI. That's all I'll say about that, but talk to our PowerTech team. We'll do a free security scan for you. Object security is often an afterthought. IBMI, we've kind of lived with this mantra that IBMI is secure. It is, but really it's securable because we as administrators maybe have not executed things properly. It's easy to access the system today with things like Excel or ACS and FTP and all these other things. And these can, if we have the wrong rights to them, we can have end users updating data and not even know that it's going on. Now, of course, system values, some very basic things in the IBMI infrastructure that you could fix by just simply adding in better security around it. Backup is another topic I wanted to talk to you about, and that is in regards to doing proper backups and making sure that you have things taken care of, making sure that your PTFs are in order and up to date, that you have a complete backup strategy, that you've tested. If you are doing option 21, I have seen problems where option 21 wasn't what people thought, or people aren't actually executing it to its completion. We have a great blog on our website that talks about how you can audit your backups even without running a backup. You could see I could go on any of your systems, and in 5 minutes I could tell whether or not you have a fairly good backed up system or not. Do you have the tapes? I don't know. Where are the tapes? I don't know about that, but I'll at least know that you're executing the commands successfully. And then, tape compatibility issues. If you do go to restore your system, do you have the proper things? We're hearing a lot about doing cloud backups and things like that, but think about that. If you're doing a cloud backup to Amazon, AWS, do they have an IBMI environment for you to restore? So why do we back up? Eventually we might want to restore, right? So making sure that we can do that. And then of course, there are those out there who never did. They never did them. They aren't doing backups on a regular basis, believe it or not. And that is just putting your organization in a huge potential risk. So that's backups. And some other things to think about is testing. Just like HA, just like backups, if you don't test, you really don't have HA and you really don't have backup. So how often do you test? When do you test? Are you in a seasonal area where hurricanes, come during a certain time period, or tornadoes? So when should you be testing? You should probably prep yourself before that time period. Do you know how long it will take you to recover? Have you gone through the test to make sure that you understand what the recovery period is going to be? I can tell you as a greenhorn back in the 80s, I was responsible for backup recovery on System 38 platform, and I can remember somebody over my shoulder saying, so when's the server going to be back? When's the server going to be back? And this was like the GM who was to my senior, probably at that time, 30 years, right? So turn the table around, I can see myself, when's the system going to be back, right? Can you afford to lose some business data? So that's that recovery point objective, and thinking about, okay, if we do have this transition period and we lose some data, how can we recover that, and how are we going to do that? Does it matter what time of the year or day of the week that you have a failure, or time of the day? Is your recovery planning, your disaster recovery planning, taking that into account? And what time of year do you run your tests? You should be doing a full HA recovery test at least once a year, and you should plan for that in your budget. That's a big problem for people too. Over to you, Ash, to talk about some other business disruptions.
Yeah, I'm not actually going to talk about all of these individually, but I've worked, as I said, in IT for over 30 years now, just over 30 years, and I've encountered every one of these, apart from, luckily, terrorism. And I don't consider myself as an unlucky person. So that's 6 disruptions in 30 years, or 1 every 5 years. I've also encountered all the human errors that were on Chuck's earlier slide. Again, I'm not an unlucky person. It is going to happen. So purely using the law of averages, your business will suffer from 1 or more of these going forward. So I guess the takeaway on this slide is do whatever you can to mitigate that risk.
Yeah. So when we look at high availability, there are several roadblocks that have always been in the way, and cost is one of them. Secondary systems, secondary data center. Today's world, we can kind of help out with cloud-based replication, certainly available, cloud-based backups. Knowledge is another big issue. If you don't have the knowledge, you haven't done journaling, haven't done remote journaling, haven't set up an IASP, there are experts out there to help you out. If you're going to go into this area, make sure you have the proper knowledge or you have the proper people to work with. And we're really good at that. Ash, myself, Chuck, we know people, or we ourselves can help you out in that space and training you. Demand, business value doesn't see the value. Talk to the right business leaders. Make sure they understand how many people are using the system, how much business goes through the system. And then finally, it's too complicated and horror stories. It's that kind of paralysis by analysis. We can't do it because it's too complicated. Those are some things that have kept us from going into this HA area. So as we go into our last section, we want to talk about what are some of the current options available for you today, and over to Mr. Ash to talk about that.
Thank you. Yeah, so even businesses that have HA solutions, a lot of the businesses have probably the same solution that they originally implemented a number of years ago, despite, I think, the number of options increasing over the years. So let's take a look at some of the things on the market these days. So I guess the first one we'll talk about is DB2 Mirror for I. So this arrived with 7.4 with a fanfare, and in some quarters it's described as game-changing. So in essence, this solution is aimed at those environments where continuous availability is required, not just high, continuous. So DB2 Mirror for I is basically 2 nodes in the same data center that allow your applications to both read and write to 2 databases at the same time. And this bit's key, at the same time. The same time capability is provided by the OS using clever database technology and a new license program called IBM DB2 Mirror for I, plus a high-speed Rocky cable. You do need to be on Power 8, and of course you need to be on 7.4, but nodes can be at differing hardware generations. So you could use a P8 and a P9 system, and you can, I guess, once the next version of the OS is out, whether it's 7.5 or 8, whatever they decide to call it, you can mix OS versions as well. There's a really neat web interface where you can move your workload from one node to another. So this can be useful for maintenance purposes. So not just using it for for high availability, for disaster, but using it for maintenance, such as maybe a PTF load. And then once you've done it, you can revert back to 2 nodes. Another key thing is the users and applications only see one system. It's invisible to them. So this is really the highest of high availability. But there is a restriction here that I'll make you aware of, and it's about 200 meters, and that's the Rocky cable restriction. So this is continuous availability. It's the highest of high availability, but it isn't DR. So organizations using DB2 Mirror for I will still, in theory, need a tool that can replicate over long distances or into the cloud. So that's really why traditional software replication or hardware replication still applies, even for these active instances.
Which is a good transition to our next topic.
Exactly, yeah. So this is probably one that you're maybe a little bit more familiar with. This is this one is actually Robot HA. These are mature solutions. They're built on remote journaling, again, which is built into the IBM I operating system. So for those objects that can't be journaled, these solutions we're talking about robot HA, allows you to set a check stroke refresh interval. One word of warning here is that a number of vendors have a huge reliance on the audit journal, QAudJourn. And on some systems, this can be extremely busy because, you know, QAudJourn wasn't particularly designed for high availability. It's the audit journal, it's not the HA journal. Our own robot HA has very little dependency on QAudJourn and uses it for minimal things. So distance is not a problem with this type of solution. So cloud can be an option. You can have your target machine in the cloud, and there are both synchronous and async communication options here.
Thanks, Ash. You know, so a couple other things about robot HA, and before we get into Power HA, is that robot HA, we're doing a webinar next week, Thursday, same time. We'll be diving a lot further into that. And I apologize, we went a little over. You may or may not know, we don't always practice everything we're going to say, so sometimes we take a little longer. But we'll continue on. We'll make sure we get through all the content here for you. I've got a few more slides. Power HA, this too is not new technology. Products like robot HA have been around for 3 decades. Power HA has been around for a full decade. This uses SAN storage or internal storage to do replication of your data at the disk level. And so what you do here, though, is you isolate your business data into what we call independent auxiliary storage pool, and then we're replicating real-time the disk sector by sector to the other IASP that's not active. So it's varied off, and you still have the operating system running in something called sysbase. So Power HA, if you don't know, Help Systems works on this technology. We actually have developers on our staff that work on it. Certainly is technology that's very viable. Beware of distance. So depending upon whether you're using asynchronous or synchronous type replication, distance can be an issue. There's a thing called Metro Mirror, which is about a 20-30 kilometer distance, and then there's the global mirror, which is an asynchronous replication that you can have. Certainly people, as we say, are replicating across the pond, which would be the Atlantic or the Pacific or whatever, depending upon where you're located. They certainly are doing that. So Power HA has been around for a while, and it's definitely a good option on IBM. And then, of course, we can combine these things together. We can combine Power HA with Robot HA, and for that matter, DB2 Mirror for I, and deliver on disaster recovery, high availability, whatever you want to call it. And that's a topic in itself. What is DR versus HA, right? But in this scenario here, we have a customer using Robot HA in sysbase, replicating sysbase for Power HA. We have Power HA replicating your business data, and then we have Robot HA replicating from the IASP out to a BI partition. So in that case there, customer is doing their BI on a secondary server, secondary partition, which is certainly some flexibility that you get by combining the two technologies together. And Chuck, over to you for our last polling question.
All right, I'm going to launch our next polling question. How can we help you? Maybe you'd like more information on backup and recovery at Help Systems. Let's talk about Robot HA. Maybe you'd like to start a Robot HA trial. You'd like a free security scan. Highly recommend that for anyone. Free service. And maybe a tech update conversation with either me or Tom or Ash about the technology that you own and where it's going, and you know, what some of our other resources are that might benefit you.
Yeah, that's a great discussion that we have. I just had one of those this morning before, in the wee hours of the morning here, before we got started, and working with a customer and taking them through what's new at Help Systems. Great discussions. The free scans are something we've been doing for a long time now. We've been doing those, and very valuable discussion with customer to help pinpoint what's going on. And then, of course, if you're interested in HA, we always do trials and demos on the Robot HA product. We also can show you some things in combination with Power HA if you'd like to. So, you know, the world at Help Systems has changed quite a bit. While we leave this polling question up for people, Chuck, before we close it out, we have a few questions coming in. One of the questions is from Miguel is, what improvements has 7.4 version to help or support the disaster recovery system? Would DB2 Mirror replace HA products? So that's kind of a, you know, interesting question. There's been a lot of discussion around DB2 Mirror. There's good and there's bad. DB2 Mirror can provide that high availability environment, The downside about it is that it is a in the data center only option, and also it's expensive. You have to have duplicate of everything. There's no such thing as a CBU when it comes to DB2 mirror. You have to have 2 active production servers. So the cost goes up, the licensing goes up, and everything else on that. So it's really kind of meant initially here for big pocketbooks and people that really, really can't afford 0 downtime. So does it replace? No, it augments. It's another option for you. Is that, would you agree with that, Ash and Chuck? Just as it's really another option.
Yeah, completely. And as you say, it's aimed at I think at the moment anyway, for the top end market. I would imagine over the years, that price will tumble down, and the options will get more varied. But yeah, spot on, Tom.
Yeah. So then, let's wrap up here a little bit with just all the different things we do on IBMI. Don't forget, Help Systems does backup and HA, document management, cybersecurity, monitoring, business intelligence, capacity planning, and automation, all centered around IBMI. And if that's not enough and you have other servers out there, we do a lot of those same things for Windows, Unix, and Linux. With that said, I know we've taken you over a little bit today. We really appreciate your time. We have a few more questions out there. We'll answer those offline. You've been a wonderful group to be with us today. Ash and Chuck, thank you for joining me on today's webinar.
Have a great day, everybody.